Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason Lane. I'm the Dean of the School of Education at the University at Albany. And we are thrilled to have you with us for an incredibly important conversation, which is getting literal, exploring media literacy in K-12 education. And this is a great month to do it in, being School Library Month. And so we're thrilled to welcome an outstanding panel with us today to explore a lot of these cutting edge issues. I'll just note, you could see from the video that there's a lot happening right now with edTrends and remote ED. And if you haven't checked out our website, remoteed.org, I would encourage you to do so. There's a whole host of resources there that are designed specifically for parents and teachers, students, to help navigate this strange new world that we have now been in for over a year of remote learning and remote teaching. And edTrends, we are now entering our second year of the webinar, which was created as a way to bring people together to discuss critical issues. And now I think it has continued to build community among folks here in the Capital Region and well beyond. And so we're just delighted to be able to have you joining us today. And with that, I will get out of the way and turn it over to Annie Gertzoff to kick us off. So Annie.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Jerry. My name is Annie Gerstoff. I'm the School Library System Director at Capital Region BOCES. Thank you so much for taking the time to join our conversation today around something that impacts us in almost every aspect of our lives. Information and media are constant presence in our lives and in the lives of our students. And we often make assumptions about the quality of the media, and we often make assumptions about our students' abilities to think critically about the information that they're seeing. So I'm excited to have this panel of experts here today, and at this point, I would like them to introduce themselves. Bernie, can we start with you, please?
Sure, my name is Bernard Bott. I'm a high school librarian at Guilderland High School up in Guilderland, New York.
Thank you. Amber?
Hi, I'm Amber Desimoni. I'm an English teacher at Niskayuna High School.
Thank you. Carol Ann?
That's what happens when you mute. I'm Carol Ann Germain. I am a faculty member at the University at Albany and the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity, which oversees information science, informatics, and library science.
Thank you. I already did myself. Donna?
Hi, I'm Donna McAndrews. I am the librarian at Niskayuna High School.
Thank you. And Maura?
Hi, I'm Maura Nichols. I'm the librarian at Farnsworth Middle School in Guilderland, New York.
Thank you. Before we dive in, I just like to take a moment to ask you, our audience, a question to get your wheels turning. And you can answer this in the chat, or you can unmute and share your thoughts. And our question is, what issues related to media literacy and the use of information seem to be challenges for your students? And I would invite also the panel to speak to this if you have any big issues that you see. You can go ahead and unmute if you'd like. I love that.
Reliable sources hits close to home, not knowing which sources to or are reliable in just the massive amount of information that's out there today.
I love that word, infowhelm. Yeah. Okay, so you can continue to add to this if you wish, and I'll also leave some time at the end for us to have some questions, some Q&A. You can certainly feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and I will kind of manage that for our panelists. But we will be sure to leave some time at the end for some questions, because I'm hoping that we will spark some of those for you. So let's take a moment to define the terms that we're using here. We've all heard the terms media literacy, information literacy, news literacy, and digital literacy used interchangeably, but they do have different nuances in definition. Would you please talk about the overlap between these terms? Bernie, I'll have you start, please.
Sure. I'm going to go back to 1990-ish to when I know it's crazy because the American Library Association has had a definition that I think still holds true to some extent. It's just the ability to recognize, locate, evaluate, and then use information for a specific need. And to go a little bit further into that, into the 21st century here, the ability to use information is really important because you could locate it, you could read it, you could digest it, I guess, but then to use it to create something new or kind of engage in civil conversation, I think is the piece that is really missing right now. And I think it's our job to kind of help students, guide students through that. But lingering on the word literacy there for a moment, I think the traditional word might harken back to something like reading and writing and the maybe ability to decode words and letters, right? But I think now we're moving into a phase in which we have to have students who can decode thoughts, ideas, and text. And that's really, really hard to do. But as far as information literacy goes, media literacy, news literacy, and digital literacy, these are all literacies that are centered around the consumption of information. And where it gets kind of tricky is, and I'm going to focus maybe a little bit here on media literacy, but if we look at information literacy as the bridge, the pillars that hold that up are digital literacy, news literacy, and media literacy. Media being the most important right now, in my opinion, because we're inundated with media. So that one's really kind of hits close to home because of the amount of media that we have, and that includes social media as well. News literacy is kind of falls within the media literacy scope because everything that's put out there now is put out there through media. It's not carried by conversation anymore. We're talking about print, we're talking about podcasts, we're talking about blogs, social media. So media literacy kind of encompasses all of those things, some of which deals with news. The one that's kind of tricky for me, and I might rely on my other panelists here though, is I guess digital literacy. And the way I kind of see digital literacy is that it's kind of a two-way street. You are now, or students are, we all are, supposed to be digitally literate. And what that means is we're producing stuff that is out there in the digital sphere, as well as consuming things. Does that kind of make sense to all of you? These literacies are kind of all in the Venn diagram, we all kind of meet in the middle and they're all information literacy. But the way I see media literacy is more dealing with news, ideas, thoughts. Digital literacy is our responsibility and where digital citizenship and ethics kind of comes in.
I was just going to piggyback on that, where I actually, with the two-way street, I find it interesting that somebody put in the chat about answering emails, because it's even, we all have that problem as adults and as our students. And it's also learning to write a professional email too that students sometimes have trouble with, or we have to step back and say, you go along and think they're learning how to do this. Of course, we know how to do. We kind of picked it up as we went along, and I think we have to step back and say too. We have to kind of teach them how to put things out there themselves in the world, and also what's a professional use of this sort of technology look like too. And I think that all goes along with this type of literacy.
I could just pick up on that, Maura. I also sort of like, sometimes I'll tell people that I feel like my job is helping kids navigate the world where we have the First Amendment. And there's basically, because we have free speech and we value that in this country, we need to know how to use it and also recognize what kind of information we're getting. So I feel like that's my whole job. And thank goodness we have free speech, but also with the amount of information that's out there, it has become something that kids really need like direct instruction about, so that when they're going out and using it, they're not in dangerous situations or doing things that, can range from being just embarrassing to actually harassing someone once they're actually involved. So I think of that as sort of like the underpinning of the work that I do.
I wrote that down so I can use it to navigate the First Amendment. I'm going to use that at some point in my lessons. So thank you.
I think another aspect of the digital literacy, it probably could be taught at a high school level. I teach it at a college level, is the idea of digital professionalism. And we talk about the idea of writing an appropriate email and responding to people. Often I have to create a template for them to even start thinking about entering the professional workforce. So it's, a lot is taken for granted. And I think sometimes because our students are digital natives, they've developed really bad digital native habits. And so, breaking from that can sometimes be difficult.
In the chat, Leah says, some of my students write replies to my emails in the subject line instead of the email itself. I think that really speaks to what you're talking about, Carol-Ann. They have these kind of bad habits that they need to be taught how to use these tools effectively. Building capacity in these literacies is critical for our students, as we mentioned, not just in school, but also in real life. In what ways do you see these literacies playing out in real life at all levels? Maura, would you like to get us started?
Sure. So when we were kind of brainstorming yesterday, what really hit me about this question was actually something that happened when I was teaching a fake news lesson, media literacy, as part of an enrichment class. So it can be taught across all levels, but I just happened to be working with an enrichment teacher who teaches social media and a current events class. And this was last year in March. End of February, beginning of March, right before we all went home, and went to remote learning. And it was right when the coronavirus was kind of spreading. And I brought in a real world example because what started to happen was my best friend from high school, her husband is from Taiwan and her children are half Asian. She lives in New Jersey. And she had sent me a screenshot of a relative of hers who actually put on Facebook, get ready, the China virus is coming, stay away from Chinese restaurants. They're bringing it over here after the Chinese New Year, and just all these really horrible stereotypes and inappropriate language. And, this was going out to somebody who has a husband who's from Taiwan and children who are half Asian. And she wrote back to them and said, you're spreading lies about this, and this is affecting my family. They just said, well, this is what we're hearing and this is what we're seeing online. And I think it speaks to how important this is becoming in our national discourse, that this is going beyond, we need to learn how to debate our opinions, but it's that we need to know how to decipher what we're seeing online and discern that it's not true and it's hurtful. And I think it's adding to a lot of misconceptions that are out there. And the kids really I think the kids really, it hit home for them. I really think, to add really quick to that, I really think it hit home for them, and they realized, it's not just, our teachers telling us, oh, we have to be good digital citizens, we have to watch what we post online. It's, oh yeah, I'm seeing this stuff every day too. It's not just at school. This is my social media feed. This is my Twitter feed. This is my TikTok. So.
And when I work with students, and it's different than Maura's is really heartfelt, because that's really important for students to be aware of the information that they're encountering. When I teach, a lot of times I teach students about scholarships, which for many of your high school students and for our undergraduates, even our graduate students, is going to be really important, and how to look for that information. Sometimes that's a lot trickier. That they're used to just going out on Google and typing in a big long sentence or a question for information, and fine tuning that, searching in a specific domain, thinking again about professionalism is important, and where careers and subjects are. But one of the things that I bring up with them, which really will affect them if they fall into that trap, is the fact that a lot of scholarships are what I define to them as for profit. And so I always tell them, if you find a scholarship, first of all, that's too good to be true. Okay. I'm going to get, $20,000 if I send you $25. Well, the people who are putting these out are hoping they get 100,000 students who send them, $25. That's $2.5 million. And so they're the ones who, in the long run are going to be making, the most money. In addition, that just putting your information in something that says, oh, you don't have to pay for it, it's free, and you don't have to, write a project statement or a personal statement. You're just giving them your information. Well, I always say, where do you think that information is going, and how do you think they're using your personal information? And the idea of sharing information, students seem very willing to put out their information, and they need to, that digital literacy, they need to be aware of how they're using it.
I was just going to jump on that same idea that some of our students, I think that they are learning that. And we have some students in our district who serve as tutors, as like peer tutors for each other. And in addition, they do something like called a Master Tech program, where they work with senior citizens in our community and help them with their technology. And one of the things that they have been doing is helping senior citizens sort of recognize emails that are coming in, asking for information. And I think some of them have even dealt with like social media, Facebook sort of things, where they're helping older people. And we really found that having them do that, where they actually have to teach it to somebody else and help somebody else recognize it, is such a great practice for them. Not every single one of our students is involved in that, but it is one of those things where I see it as sort of a lifelong skill and something that they can share with another generation that hasn't been growing up in all of this.
When we talk about the amount of information that's out there, it's important to note that, I think it was Carol that noted, these kids are digital natives. They know nothing other than a huge swath of information and answers at their fingertips. And that becomes difficult when you're trying to teach the long game. The short game is a really quick and dirty answer, right? Like, how big is a great white shark? But when you're trying to teach this sort of stuff, we have to get them to focus a little bit on the work and what it takes to actually find and dig. We've sort of lost a little bit of the magic that it takes to find an answer and develop all of the skills that are associated with finding the answer. So they're just inundated with information, and how that plays out in real life, I think it's so evident on social media how that happens. And when someone reads something, it's usually the first answer that they find in Google. 86% of high schoolers do not go past the first page in Google. And then all of a sudden we have the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, I've read a little bit, so now I'm an expert. And that's a really loose interpretation of the Dunning-Kruger effect. But then what is their next step? Their next step is not to ask the appropriate questions often. And this goes for adults as well. And I'm certainly guilty of it too. So I'm not painting myself as the research saint. But their next step is then throwing it directly on social media. And then it's out there for everyone else to consume. So how's it playing out in real life? It is an answer. That answer is a million miles long, because it is just the drop in the calm pond, and the ripple effect it goes on for miles. And I think social media is really part of the problem. And I don't know, and this might be a question, whose responsibility is it at some point to direct and students, and at what age? And we'll get to this, I think, a little later, but at what age should that start? Because it has to be both teachers, the school system, yes, obviously, it has to be at home, and it has to be the friends that they surround themselves with. And it has to also they also have to understand their own personal values that go along with this as well. So the problem, it plays out so many different ways in real life that I think we're a big chunk of the answer. Yes, absolutely. But I do think that there are other players involved here, and I don't know that everyone is on the same page. Sometimes administrators aren't even on the same page when they look at their library staff and kind of try to calculate their values around budget. rather than what we actually do.
To go along with that and the Dunning-Kruger effect, there's a TED Talk that we've been using for a few years by J. Marshall Shepard, and he talks about the 3 kinds of confirmation bias that are shaping your worldview. And it's very accessible, and it's a good way for the kids to learn some definitions and then also reflect on how confirmation bias is affecting their worldview and recognize it in their own lives, and how they need to pop their filter bubble and kind of reach out for more sources. So, and we do have the kids do a reflection, and we do get some interesting responses for them saying, I didn't realize I was in such a filter bubble. And it's pretty enlightening to see it from their point of view too, because we do see them as digital natives, and we do kind of see them as like, well, they know technology better than I do because I'm older, but they really don't know how to use it sometimes, or they could be using it more effectively.
I think one thing we talked about yesterday too was how this creates an echo chamber, and how they're finding sources and then they find other sources that say similar things, and the dangers of that, and not expanding that bubble. Yeah. Speaking of echo chambers, misinformation, disinformation, and fake news are definitely everywhere right now. Please talk about how you address these topics with students and what the dangers are of not directly addressing these issues. Carol, would you like to start us off?
Well, I'm actually going to do something similar to Bernie. He probably did it in a little better way than I'm doing, but take a second to think about what fake news is, what misinformation is, and what disinformation is. And so we talked about this yesterday in our brainstorming. And so I'm confident that I know what those 3 mean. And so then I went out and I said, well, let me do a Google search. What's Google going to pick up? And so if you go out there and you see the dictionaries that are out there are all, they're very different in how they present this. So then I said, well, I guess I'm just going to go to the Oxford English Dictionary, because that's, I'm pretty confident that's going to be correct. But in fake news, it's relatively simple and straightforward that it is a false story that is presented in a news outlet. When we're thinking of misinformation and disinformation, this seems to be where there's a lot of overlap between a lot of the definitions that are out there on Google. The idea of misinformation is wrong or misleading information and spreading of false or inaccurate information, as compared to disinformation in the OED, which is the deliberately spreading that false information. And then it goes, especially when supplied by a government or its agent to a foreign power or to the media, with the intention of influencing the policies or opinions of those who receive it. So this is something that gets really, really blurry, even when we're looking at 3 terms that we usually have confidence in knowing what they mean. So our students, in dealing with so much information on so many different topics, this becomes quite difficult. And I think for all of us, one of the things that we do, especially when it comes to news and how they're reading news and how they're thinking about news, and this can be in social media as well, is looking at that headline or that tagline. And so what I do with students is I give them a sheet with 7 different headlines, and those can be anywhere. They can be from the New York Times, they can be from the Onion. They're usually stories of, I think there was one on orange snow, which is actually a phenomenon with sand in the Sahara Desert and so far. You'd have to go look it up, sorry. So, and then we discuss, they decide whether it's real, whether it's not real, and then we discuss why and why it is not. And then we come up with some best practices of what they should be looking for. You can have a headline that in the early 1990s would have been true, which seems far-fetched now, which they'll think is false, but really at the time it was true. So we have to think of all sorts of different things of whether it's an editorial, where, and how they're perceiving it.
Yeah, I would just add that like in terms of what we do at our high school, there's a whole range of like ways that we would address this kind of thing. Like Amber and I have done projects where for months students are researching different aspects of the media, and they do everything from keeping a log of their own consumption to then talking about journalistic ethics and looking at the filter bubble issue and all of these things, and then researching their own issues within. And I feel like that allows them to go really in depth in terms of where is this misinformation? How is it present in society? What should I do about it? And then we do also just really small things like yesterday when Amber and I were just working with her 10th graders, and we had them all bring in something that they thought was a really questionable but social media post or website. And so they would bring it in, and then we talked to them about some things that they could do to evaluate that. We had already talked about like evaluating sources in terms of lateral searching and doing that kind of like finding out about your source. So we went a little bit beyond that. And in doing that, it was just so interesting to see in this really short period of time what you can accomplish with kids, where issues like misinformation and disinformation actually come up because they are realizing sometimes this information was shared by accident, this wrong information, and sometimes it was really purposeful. And so it's not like, I feel like sometimes people think, oh, I have to do giant media literacy sort of teaching, but we've been able to sort of pull in this sort of skills, even with remote learning and some people in the room and some people at home. So I feel like there's just a lot of ways that you can help kids look at what they're facing every day and work with it, and then talk about it with some strategies. I don't know, Amber, if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fun activity to have the kids, seek something out or think about something that they had seen that they questioned. And then I brought in some examples. I was like, here's some stuff that I fell for or that I clicked on. It was very clickbaity and I just clicked right on it and here it is. Or, here's a fake tweet that someone was using to slander someone. And so, yeah, it was interesting. And then, we were talking to the kids about, well, what kind of set off your alarm bells when you came across this? And some said, well, it was very poorly written. So I could tell that it wasn't like a real, journalistic website. Or, then they brought in a lot of, like conspiracy stuff, like flat earth and anti-vaccination stuff. But yeah, it was a fun activity. And, the kids got to interact with each other and kind of noodle it out about, what's kind of fishy about this website.
And also trust their instincts a little bit. Like, I feel like kids really do have good instincts. Like when they see something, they're thinking, that's weird. And we talked about how, with social media, a lot of times you get a headline and you think that actually captures the truth of what was in, the article that was shared. So it was really just kind of reinforcing some of their good instincts and helping them then use them in their daily life, not just in our research, but in their regular world and what they're exposed to on a daily basis.
I think that's huge. That the ability, well, I guess the openness for you guys to come in and say, like, listen, I fall for this stuff too. That's important, because I will 100%. If you show me a picture of Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot in the woods, I'm in, baby. Like, that's me. I'm there. I don't care. You can't tell me otherwise. So just kind of saying, I fall for this as well. And just because you want to believe it doesn't always make it true. It's always, I think teachers also, there are a lot of teachers here, they want skills that are really applicable early on. Like, what are the prioritized skills that we use that could be done immediately? We talk about the long game, and I think it's really important. I do a 6 to 8 week research project with my kids where we go through all of these. Teachers just don't have time. So when you're collaborating as a media specialist, and that's outside of my class, if I'm collaborating with an English teacher, a lot of times we have, all right, 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks and we just got to get it done. Tell me everything. The end goal is a research paper. Like, okay, well, we could do all of the things about information literacy and databases and how to Google properly and talk about Wikipedia. No. You misunderstood me. I want the half-hour lesson on databases, and then we just need you there for support. So I think a lot of the times and that's not an indictment of English teachers or that I work with. That is more to say they're so pressed for time. They want to know what is the best. They're panning for gold here. So I'm just wondering if I could just throw this back to you. Like, do you guys find something that this is a loaded question, but what is the best thing that you guys have found that has stuck and you used year after year after year to just say, evaluate a website? What's a trick that you guys have?
There's actually,
yeah, go ahead, Maura.
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, actually, we kind of had it to bring up later, but there's a website, commonsensemedia.org. I think it's a .org, yeah. And you can sign up there, and they have free, amazing lessons for digital citizenship. And sometimes too, just searching, they have a YouTube channel, and it's also the same. There's just amazing quick things. And more, I mean, I'm teaching this year, I'm teaching 5 through 8. Usually I'm 6 through 8 middle school. So we're a little younger than high school, but I think the quicker you can get to it, the better. And sometimes too, the one, I know I kind of went on a tangent, but Bernie said the one thing I actually found, it's Common Sense Media worked with another company called Flocabulary, and English teachers may have used that before and other people. So they're kind of like these little rap videos about different topics. And there's actually one about citing sources with a fish that raps about citing sources and don't believe it. And it's hilarious. And the kids really get into it and it sticks. And I think I use that a lot as a jumping off point. I can't think of the name of the video, but it's Common Sense Media on there. And that really sticks with them. And it's, you know, I hope, I don't know, it's just a launching point you can do really quick. Can you trust it? That's the name of the video. Can you trust it? Yes, you can. That's the song.
Do you want to wrap it for us?
Can you trust it? Yes, you can.
Maybe save that.
I would say for us, it has been the shift from like the sort of checklist, you know, the crap test or the checklist or whatever, to this idea of doing a lateral search where you're really looking at who is responsible for this information. What do I know about them? What can I find out using those tools like Media Bias Fact Check or allsites.com or Snopes or any of those things that are out there to help you. That's, I think, been the thing that has been most helpful for us recently.
Yeah, that chart, that Vanessa Otero, is it Ad Fontes Media? And that's really helpful because we have the kids look at that. All right, where is most of the media that you consume? Is it far left, far right? Is it factual? Is it least factual? And, you know, what are the values of reading from different parts of the chart? You know, sometimes you want to read from both sides. Sometimes you want stuff that's not, you know, totally neutral. You want to kind of see what everybody's saying about something. And then the media log is very interesting. We just have them follow their media usage for 24 hours and just write down how many hours are you on TikTok and Snapchat and all that stuff. And then who owns those companies and who owns the company that owns that company, and kind of take it up the food chain. And then we get these, you know, pretty great reflections. I ask them, like, what are you proud of with your media consumption? What are you not so proud of? And so they will, you know, they'll say, you know, I'm proud that, you know, I read a bunch of news and that's good, or I should have read more news, or I feel kind of bad that I didn't realize I was on my phone 13 hours a day and that's probably not good. So there is some really good reflection that comes out of that writing.
Yeah, I liken it to a diet, your information diet. So yeah, you can go for the quick stuff that'll fill you up for now. But in the long run, you want something that will satiate not only, you know, your body, but in this sense, you know, the paper or the end goal, the project. So that's awesome. I love the media log idea.
So I think we've talked about this, you know, a lot. We've talked about papers. We've talked about, you know, 10th grade English class specifically. So is this an issue just for high school students? At what level does the instruction here need to begin for our students? What does that instruction look like? And what does a lack of instruction, what effect does that have on our students? Maura?
So I think it could start at any level. I honestly think you have to, and this goes back to everything with education, I think, is that there has to be family, community buy-in as well. And I think you could even start with preschoolers and kindergartners and understand, show them the difference between an ad and a TV show. And this is an ad that's selling you something. It wants you to buy this toy. It's not, let's say Paw Patrol, for example, because I know my kid was really into that for a bit. This is an ad that's showing you the Paw Patrol toys, and this is the actual show, and there's a difference, and they want you to buy it. And just kind of simple things like that, pointing out advertisements versus, other things. And then too, just anytime we can, because they're going to be using this for the rest of their lives. And I think even the youngest learners are going to be spending their whole lives decoding media and visual messages more than we ever had to. And to kind of go back to what Bernie was saying before, and I think Carol as well, about the different levels of teaching it. I think even like I teach middle school level, and I could probably speak to elementary as well. I step back and teach them the different forms of fake news. And I've been pushing in more with ELA classes in 6th grade and kind of putting it out there and saying, we can talk about fake news and it can tie in with ELA. Just saying there's pure fake news, there's clickbait, there's hoax and parody sites. Sometimes they don't understand the difference between that. They don't know what a parody is. And I just did this lesson a few weeks back with 5th grade. They don't know what a satire site is. They don't know what satire is. So I think it's a lot of our assumptions as adults that, they've gotten this before, and even refreshing is not a bad thing. And then I also too have started to bring up digital images and fake images and born images, and with the older kids, deep fakes and how those videos are out there as well. And just kind of showing them examples and saying, it's not just, made up news. It's these other things as well that can trick you. And then finally, I also bring up that sometimes the media gets it wrong. And I think that's important to point out too. In my past life, I was actually a TV news producer. And sometimes, you get a source that tells you the wrong information for either their own reasons or just because they didn't know at the time, or breaking news when all that is a mess. And they're just trying to be the first people to get it on. So I think even just stepping back and kind of defining the different forms can help as well at any level.
I completely agree, Maura. And I feel like, as soon as a child is using an app on a phone, then they should be getting some direct instruction on it. And I feel like, it goes back to that idea that we think of them as digital natives, and they might know how to use the device, but navigating the information is where we come in. And I think that it is valuable that they have this direct instruction, a lot of times embedded within an English class, or sometimes like Bernie has a class all its own for this. But I think if you are, looking at like when to do it, we believe all through every minute. One thing I will also add is that it gets a little tricky. Like I have had times at the high school where, I push media literacy all the time, and I've gotten teachers to do things. And now, I do have some teachers who don't want to do a unit on news literacy where kids follow a news cycle and really look at all different news sources. Like, what does that look like in Fox News? What does that look like on MSNBC? And doing this, and they're worried about how political it is because parents get upset when they start to think, maybe I shouldn't just look at this one. And so we do have that weight on us of knowing that there's a parental perspective that is very present in their lives. So we're always trying to, help kids develop the skills and think for themselves, while at the same time not, I guess, upsetting the balance at home.
Yeah, I'll agree with all of that. I have so much to say on like the home thing, but we're short on time. But one thing that I do use is critical thinking skills in my class that I teach. I teach an inquiry class, and as they're going through any sort of article, a lot of these kids are higher level kids anyway, but you find that they whiff on a lot of stuff. Just asking who's the author? Who's the author of this article? What are their credentials? Is it a third party? They could look at an article from the Atlantic and try to cite that, but the study that they're actually referencing within their work is, that's summarized in that Atlantic article. So kind of what I like to use is my best definition of critical thinking has always been Deborah Meyer's 5 Habits of the Mind, and it's pretty easy. If you remember SPECS, it's significance, evidence. No, I'm sorry, there's a P in there. Significance, perspective, evidence, connection, and then supposition. What if it were different? It's kind of a good little, I know checklists aren't the best thing, but as they're reading through, what is the significance of this article? What is a perspective? It allows them to check their bias. It allows them to see the bias of potentially the author too. What does the evidence actually say? Are you citing a study? Or are you citing a study or a summary of a study? And then going through and just kind of seeing what are the connections that they're trying to make. Is that bringing in a narrative that they want to then force out for their parent company? And what if it were a little bit different? What if somebody else wrote this in a different way? So our class kind of runs through that as just a very quick, tangible way for them to look at any piece of media that's out there and say, all right, specs is in mind. What is the significance? What is the perspective? What is the evidence there? So I think it's really important to just kind of have those tools in your toolbox and get them to have it second nature. I see a lot of stuff in there about social media and like kids as young as 2 having phones. I think it's important to note when it comes to this stuff, even the people who have created the apps and the phones don't let their children use it. So, I mean, that speaks volumes to me. What is the purpose? If we want to run through critical thinking, what is the significance of that? They know the implications of it, and it often isn't good. But I don't want to paint all social media with a broad brush. But it's a tough one to navigate, especially because kids are getting connected sooner and sooner and sooner.
And getting back to the question of is this just for high school students? I think it's a lifelong necessity. And so here's a place where, from very young, I mean, especially if you're going to be using social media at 2 years old, that creeps me out. I didn't let my kids have TV when they were little. So, I think it's important. And one of the things that came up yesterday was the idea of when I talk to my students, there is some level of redundancy. They're college students. They've learned it in high school. They may have learned it from, more in middle school, but I don't think there's a problem with this level of redundancy that they hear it again, because sometimes they're ready to embrace it now. And part of our discussion is that they have people that are around them that they're going to all of a sudden start being not really totally responsible, but they have a responsibility. And so I tell them, with their parents or, their grandparents, that they have some password so that if somebody is trying to scam, one of their relatives, one of their older friends, that they'll know that it is them or not them. And I think that occurs a lot more than we think. There's so much information about people on the web. If you go out and look for somebody, you can see their connections pretty quickly through some of these tools that are out there, and you really don't have to work hard. So if someone's going to scam, they can access that information, but it's up to us to really, let students know that they can be intermediaries with that.
Okay. Ken, I know we've talked a little bit about this already. You've given some great examples, but we have about 10 minutes left. If you would like to share some other examples of how you address these literacies within the context of classroom assignments, I know we'd all love to hear some more creative ideas. And I also encourage you as audience members, if you have some questions, to put them into the chat and we can bring those up as well.
One thing that we do that's kind of fun, we didn't do it this year because it's just too crazy, but we'll write down a bunch of different things like Snapchat or iMessage and all these things and put them on newsprint and tell the kids, turn your phones on, turn the volume on. Let's hear all your notifications during this block. And every time they get a notification, they have to get up and put a little check mark on the newsprint under what notification they're getting. And then at the end, you could have like 100 notifications. I mean, it could be hundreds. And just think about how distracting that is. It's too much this year just because I can't deal with it because they're already distracted. They're probably already playing video games at home. I have no idea. So that's one thing that we do that was really fun. And then something I did this year that I hadn't done before was I had the kids create a piece of media. So they could use slides or Adobe Spark or whatever, Canva, and create a PSA or an ad and use some of the persuasion techniques that we talked about or propaganda techniques, or just create a PSA for other 10th graders about filter bubbles. What should they know? What's a call to action? Just make it look like something we could hang up in the hallway to let other people know about media. And we watched Beware Online Filter Bubbles. There's a TED Talk that we watched. And one activity that he kind of talks about in that video is have everybody do the same Google search and see how different it is for each person, how it's tailored to them.
Yeah, we just to tag along with what Amber's saying is, kind of looking at the Google algorithms and then the algorithms of everything else and how that affects what comes into their world. And I think that is something that kids are beginning to understand now. Like they're starting to realize, I'm getting the same things all the time. So to have that experience of seeing, oh, now I understand why that's happening, and I don't really want somebody else controlling my information that way. So those are, fun, but also really edifying moments for them.
Yeah, one of the things that we do in my inquiry class, their midterm is 8 weeks long, and they are for the first, so it takes 2 months, but for the first part of the year, they are allowed to Google whatever they want with respect to their research topic. So we don't hold them to, we encourage them to use databases, but we don't hold them to it. And what that allows them to do is figure out what search terms are working for them, which is huge. Search terms are such a vital part of this process of information literacy. And I don't think we spend a lot of time on it for time reasons, obviously. But my kids, they figure out pretty quickly which ones work and what don't. For example, if it was researching a controversial topic like plastic surgery, instead of using plastic surgery, it might be for kids under 18 and parental permission, they would use cosmetic surgery. So that controlled thesaurus comes in, which is, InfoScience 101. By the time they get to their midterm, they should have a pretty good idea of what search terms not to use. And I think that's important. What search terms not to use is just as important as what search terms to use. So when they jump into databases then, which they're only allowed to use 3 databases, articles from databases, and they're required to use 3 in the first month, they find it so much easier to use a database than using the internet. And they've had the search terms down, and they jump on a database, and suddenly the internet shrinks to this. And it is a wonderful thing to see. They're reading scholarly articles and peer-reviewed journals, and they find it easier than going out there and trying to sift through and navigate this strange world that is the internet. So practices that you could implement tomorrow, take your search terms in that time that you have, get those search terms down and see what it's like on the internet versus a database. And I'm always surprised at how their reactions to it and their feedback and reflections are just wonderful.
Absolutely, Bernie. I would say we spend a lot of time, learning about a natural language search and how that works versus keyword search and how to use it, and even how a keyword search gives you different results when you do a Google search than a natural language search. You get more academic journals at the top of your hit list. So I think that is something that kids really resist, is moving from natural language to keywords. And then once they move over that hump and they get to the other side where keywords are acceptable, then the whole world seems to open up and they're like, oh, now I get it. So yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it. And we got to keep at it for sure.
I'll just say too, I know we don't have much time, but another thing that could be a whole nother discussion is just, I also do a lesson, and I actually enjoy teaching it, on copyright and fair use. And that, I see Bernie clapping because yes. So that comes into play a lot as a creator. So you're not just consuming media, you're also creating it, and you're also using other people's work. And I think that's a concept that adults don't even understand, and it's not their fault because you just assume if it's out there, you can use it. So I kind of came up with, in a roundabout way, a skit where I have one kid do a dance move because they really like doing that. So they come up with, I say, okay, who can come up with their own dance move that you would see on Fortnite? Now that Fortnite's out, I use that. But I just say a dance move you would see in a game. And they'll come up and they'll do their move. And then I'll call in another kid and say, okay, now you're going to copy his dance move. And we're going to say that he did that on TikTok. Now I use TikTok. I used to use YouTube. He did that on TikTok and he came up with it. It was his brand new dance. And now you're getting more hits than he is. And now you're getting sponsorships, but he's the one that came up with that dance. So how does that make you feel? And then we kind of go through the whole thing, and I make them have a court where we get, we go through plagiarism and copyright law, not the whole, but, you know, what do you think a judge would say? Would they be awarded? And then we go through timestamps and, you know, so it kind of gets them thinking about the creator part of it. And then that launches usually a million questions about, well, I saw this on TikTok and I saw this on YouTube. Is that copyright? Is that? So I think that's another area of media literacy that doesn't always get touched upon too, is what we're using. Not just what we're consuming, but what we're using to then push back out into what we're, you know, our products as students.
So just to recap, Maura, you have dancing and rapping in your life?
Yes, we do a lot of dancing and rapping and singing.
So glad I don't teach middle school.
It's a lot of fun, Bernie. There's a lot of Minecraft.
Oh, I love it. I would like to be respectful of our time. And I just want to say how much fun I've had talking with this group and hearing them bounce ideas off of each other. So I just want to thank you all to this panel for being such a wonderful panel. And for those of you in the audience, reach out to your school librarian and see what they have to say. I can tell you they would love to talk to you about any of these wide range of topics, copyright, media literacy, information literacy. Just say, hey, what do you know about this? They'll talk to you about it. And I can guarantee you that you'll have a good time. Maybe you'll do some rapping, but you're guaranteed to have a great conversation. So with that, if there are any final thoughts, thank you for coming.
Let's do this again tomorrow. Who's in?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
I'll bring my raps. I'll bring
Maybe
my
hold off on that.
Well, thank you everyone for joining edTrends today. I want to thank the panelists for a wonderful presentation. It was lovely to see the chat so invigorating today. I mean, there was a lot of comments, and I think that this may be a conversation we may need to continue in the near future. So again, thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise. And I wish you all happiness and health. And until next week on edTrends. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.